Hi everyone, and welcome to this conversation in a series of Nova 111 talks with Mikael Fraenkel, CFO at Airmee. This conversation will last until 1 p.m. and will be divided into three parts. First, I will give you a brief introduction to Nova and what Nova 111 is. Then we'll focus on the reason why we're all here, the conversation with Mikael and his life story and where he's heading. And we'll finish off with a Q&A and answer your questions to Mikael. You can post them in the chat all throughout this Nova 111 talk, but it's important that you create a YouTube profile to do so. It only takes 20 seconds. And as I said, please post them continuously during the conversation as soon as you have any question, and we'll lift them in the Q&A. But starting off, my name is Pontus Nylén, and I work at Nova as a business developer and client manager. And many of your listeners are Nova members, others are not. And for those of you who are not familiar with Nova, it's a by invitation only top talent network born in Sweden in 1997. Today we are over 12,000 members globally and growing. And out of those, we have above 7,000 located in the Nordics. Our main objective is to connect and develop our members and accelerate their development, careers, and help them reach their full potential to ultimately have a positive impact on society and maybe even the world. And the Nova network, as it is today, was born from a talent list called Nova Hundreds. And in 2020, we decided it was time to launch a new kind of talent list, the Nova 111. Sweden's first evidence-based talent list, where we presented 10 stars in 11 different categories. And this had been selected through a scientific selection process involving IQ, personality tests, as well as video interviews. And each nominee was also reviewed by a jury of industry experts, as well as assessment professionals. The jury selected one outstanding talent in each category. And in this series of conversations, we will have the privilege to meet all of these superstars. So please enjoy this conversation with Mikael Fraenkel, winner of the Management Consulting vertical. Welcome, Mikael.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. How are you?
Very good, thanks. In this cold Stockholm day. How about you?
Very good. It's getting a bit warmer. I'm a bit worried that all the ice is going to melt because I'm a bit of a skier or a skater. So we'll see what happens. But let's not talk about that. Let's dive into you. And I'd like to start off with talking a bit about your background, your early years. Where are you from and what were you like growing up?
Absolutely. I'm born in Stockholm, but raised a bit all over, I wanted to say. I spent 6 years as a kid living in France, in Paris, then moved back to Stockholm, grew up here, played chess, played soccer, but decided pretty early, I was pretty competitive and decided I wanted to go into business. So that landed me at Stockholm School of Economics. Those were my early years.
Very cool. A lot of early years, going up all the way to SSC. But let's back up a little bit, because you mentioned chess, you mentioned football. What were your other great aspirations as a kid?
Yeah, look, I think I realized pretty early that I was quite competitive in nature. So I got a bit of both, individual sport, or if you can call chess a sport, I guess, with the World Championship going on right now in chess. Hopefully many recognize it as an athletic sport, at least an intellectual sport. So I played a lot of chess competitively growing up, and then I also played a lot of football and got more of the team mentality side, achieving something together. But I think I was also very competitive in that aspect. And I guess in the earlier years, maybe I didn't apply that as much in my school side, but I think when I came into the a few years into my teens, I started getting pretty competitive about school and grades as well. So eventually it translated into that. To that as well. Yeah, no, but grew up outside of Stockholm, in a family that loved to travel and see the world. My mom sort of had 3 different careers, but always with an international component to it. And my dad worked at Ericsson, which is a big international company. So I think it was something they kind of instilled in me and my brother, that traveling, seeing the world, and moving around was sort of one of the great joys of life.
How did you end up in Paris? Was it your mother or father?
Yeah, it was my dad who moved with Eric. My mom was at Televerket, that then became Telia, and moved with them there. So and I was a young kid, so I was 2 to 8 years old when I lived in Paris. So I kind of came back, speaking French fluently, but didn't have that many other very concrete memories. Some early memories, of course, but always felt that France was kind of a second home country, and I've ended up going back there a lot. And I guess by coincidence, my girlfriend is half French. So
Okay.
that tie continues to France.
Cool. And your parents' passion for the telecom industry didn't imprint on you?
Yeah, it's a funny story actually, because I swore that that I wasn't going to go into something with telecoms or engineering heavy. I'd heard the discussions about the telecom industry around the table growing up, and I was not going to become an engineer. I was going to go into business and work with something different, I thought. And then when my professional career started at BCG, I thought, this is great. I'm going to go see all the, work in all these different industries. And I did. In the first few years, I think I've spent time working in almost all of the industry verticals that we had at BCG. But a few years in, I did a project in telecom then. And funnily enough, that ended up then defining the next 8 years or so at BCG. So I worked in our telecom, media, and technology practice. So yeah, somehow it seemed that my link to telecom couldn't escape me.
The circle closed in the end.
Right. Absolutely.
Great. And going forward a bit, you mentioned your degree from SSE, but you also studied math at KTH in Stockholm. You did exchanges at Sciences Po and in San Diego. I mean, you talked about how your parents inspired you to a more global mindset, but was it anything else that made you broaden your horizons in studying the subjects you studied, as well as where you studied them?
Yeah, I think I've always had an itch, in sort of 3-4 year cycles to do something very different, to get out, to have these international experiences. So after senior high school, I spent half a year. I had a gap year. I worked a bit, and then I spent half a year in San Diego, which was also just a great place to be spending time in Southern California, maybe recharging a little bit, for after having been very focused on school, and then knowing that I had a fun and an exciting chapter coming up with Stockholm School of Economics. And I had a great time there. Tried to add studies at KTH, but I was doing plenty of different things. I was working part-time, and I was being part of the student association. So, doing that parallel degree, I think at KTH ended up being something I dropped after a semester and a half, and realized I had to focus a little bit at least. And I think I also felt the itch at that time to do something different. So I'd had my internship my last summer at SSE at BCG, and I just loved it, and signed directly when I got the offer to return full time when I was done with studies. And then had my exchange to Paris, Sciences Po Paris, in the last year. So it was again a great section of life to sort of get a bit of a pause, get out and see the world. And I remember, I had a small apartment in central Paris, and when I walked to school, which was on the Rive Gauche, on the southern bank, and I was living on the north bank, so that meant I basically walked past the Louvre. I walked, along the Seine, and I was just pinching myself in the arm every morning and asking myself, am I really going to school, in this environment? So it ended up being a great way to again get something very different in there and do something international before life at BCG started.
Very interesting. And how do you feel like your international endeavors, how have they affected the way you handle people, the way you do business? Any examples there?
I think for me, it's always been something that's very important, that's very motivating. It's been something I've sought out to be in international contexts. I feel like it's rewarding, it gives energy. There's a dynamic to being part of a larger context, to dealing with groups of people who have different backgrounds, different views, different ideas, different mindsets, and come from those backgrounds. So I think that was one of the things that also attracted me a lot to BCG, was that would be working with international companies. BCG itself is a very international company. I knew there would probably be opportunities to go and work in other countries relatively early on in my career. So for me, this has always been something that motivated me, that I've sought out, and that's given a lot of energy. And I feel like for that chapter of my career, I got a lot of that. It lived up, so to say, to my hopes, and it's certainly, I think, one of the great things that I got to experience as part of my career there.
Was that the main determining factor going for BCG? Because you also did an internship at Procuritas, correct?
Yeah, I'd done a few different things. I'd been at Accenture, I'd been in private equity, and I think like many at SSE, I was looking a bit towards banking as well, and looking at a few different things. But I mean, honestly, when I'd done the internship at BCG, I just liked it so much that I thought, I'm not going to jump into something else now that I've experienced this and I've seen, the sort of the team spirit, the values, the way people, work together. One of the things that I always remember strike me a lot was also just seeing the colleagues who were maybe just, 1.5 year more senior, or 3 years more senior, 5 years more senior. And you could just see, how much more responsibility they took in the project, how much more they knew, how, and kind of how impressive they were. And I realized, it's not because that person is necessarily so much better than that person. It's probably the development that happens in that short tenure, so I worked closely with an associate who'd been there 1.5 years when I did my internship there, and I just remember being so impressed by him. And then there was a woman who had been there 3 years, who was a consultant, and I just remember looking at her and saying, "Wow!" And then is that really the development that happens between 1.5 and 3 years, and so on? So yeah, that was I think that was a big determining factor for me, just having seen during my internship the development curve that clearly the colleagues I got to work with had. But then there were also things in the culture there around how much time each and every colleague spent really investing in mentoring the more junior colleagues, and the mentoring that I got during my internship. And I also realized that was just a great environment to get into right after SSE. And then we worked for an international, on the project that I did during my internship, we worked for an international client. So again, there, we traveled across the Nordics, we met, the different divisions of that company, and we were on calls and looking at other markets and, how things were going to develop in those markets. So already there, I got a glimpse of this sort of international component of work.
Very cool. And you talked a bit about the fast-paced learning curve after only 3 years what you could become. You weren't there for only 3 years.
No.
You were there for about 10.
Yeah.
Where are you right now in terms of development?
I think the reason I stayed that long at BCG was because that development is something that's so ingrained in the fabric that I think it's something everyone who's there has, and you end up you end up being challenged, and you end up putting yourself in new situations, taking on new responsibilities, and but then after, so I probably imagined when I joined that I was going to stay a few years, and then I imagined probably staying a few more years, and I got to move to New York. So I kept extending that horizon, and I was set on staying there many more years as the years sort of passed by. But then I decided to take a bit of a leap of faith and move to Airmee, a fast-growing startup, a bit of a technology logistics company, so still some ties to what I've done with advising technology companies. And it's a very different environment to step into, but it's again something that challenges me, but in a very different way. I mean, now I'm part of leading a team here at Airmee and part of developing this from what has been a quite small company into what we aim to will become a very large company going forward, but obviously a few years down the line. So it's a very different type of development. It's a very different type of role. It's been a very fun challenge. After spending over 10 years advising other companies and helping them develop, now there's a different sense, of course, of ownership now that I have a different time horizon and a different ownership over the questions. But yeah, there's a lot that's different about moving from consulting into a startup line role.
What would you say the biggest difference is?
I think, one is moving from working in projects, as we did at BCG, quite defined scope, has a time limit to them. And even though I would say I always felt an immense sense of ownership for those projects and felt extremely accountable for the outcomes and really cared about the success of my clients, being at the company, being part of a company, and knowing that it's in our hands, to stake out the next few years, and the decisions that we take now are actually ours to live with and to work with. It's a very different mindset, and it's a very different dynamic to that. And we're working with tons of things in parallel all the time. So it's a bit different than the project dynamic of working for large companies, where you can make a very big difference if you get some of their most important questions right, and you can add tons of value to that company. In a small company, there's maybe hundreds of decisions every week that build up to where we will be heading in the near term, ranging from small to large decisions. So I think that dynamic is very different.
I can imagine. We'll talk more about Airmee going forward here. I'd just like to take a quick stop at your BCG time once again, because you spent some time with the B team, correct?
Absolutely. No, that was one. So a few years in, again, on the line of doing something different every 3-4 years. 3 or so years into BCG, I applied to move to our New York office and got to move there. It was supposed to be a temporary transfer, but I remember calling back after about a year in New York and saying, I love it here, I want to stay longer. And that then led me then to doing a permanent transfer. So I was actually fully moved over to our New York office. And then as part, I'd been there for maybe a year and a half or so, I got a call that there was a project that was for something called the B team. I hadn't heard of that before, but that's an NGO founded by Richard Branson alongside, I think it was about 12 at the time, other leaders from across business and civil society, NGOs, and they had come together and created this organization that was going to advocate and help drive better business. So they had a sort of the vision was for business to prioritize people and planet alongside profits. And the name, the B team, was referring to a plan A has failed us. We need a plan B for business, basically. So it was very, very interesting. Again, in a very different, very interesting environment to see and experience. And it was already, the topic of going from the earlier days of corporate social responsibility and moving into, sustainability being at the core of a business, sustainability being, the climate crisis and how companies treat people being, so much more front and center. It was already starting to happen back then. This was in 2015, but obviously it's only accelerated ever since. So yeah, that was a very exciting time, and it was fun to get to see what I felt was sort of earlier days, maybe not the early days, but earlier days of this movement that we now see as, one of the top business priorities and discussion themes when it comes to the role of business in the world. So yeah, we worked a lot with them on setting their strategy, how they were going to communicate and advocate on these type of topics. We wrote a few reports about how to increase diversity and inclusion, the business case for that in large companies. Also, what type of targets business needed to advocate for, and the role that businesses could play in the lead up to the Paris Agreement. Yeah, and we ended up going to the World Economic Forum in Davos, and there was sort of this side event next to the main. Next to WEF, that several NGOs were organizing and hosting, and you just saw all the top leaders in the world being part of that conversation. And this was sort of at the time, a side conversation on how can we challenge, the main discussions that are going on within the forum, and how can we, pursue an even more constructive agenda when it comes to sustainability and the SDG goals for business.
Interesting. Any fun anecdotes from the World Economic Forum?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there were some parties and some dancing, and it was fun to see, some of these, you kind of, well, at that, you're just people partying, but then you realize that that's the CEO of a major Fortune 100 company. Yeah. Some other founder of very well-known businesses nowadays. So yeah, I'll maybe keep the names out, but no, but and it was just. I mean, it was again one of these very interesting moments. We hosted one meeting there where just seeing all these world leaders sitting in a circle and discussing these topics was again a bit like, what am I doing here? Is this real? Am I actually here and hearing Richard Branson and Paul Polman and this group of people sitting here and debating. So that was a very exciting experience, but it also had a lot of impact on me. It was a learning experience in terms of the importance of these questions. Obviously, I ended up learning a lot about not only these challenges that we face, but also the role that business can play. And I remember that a lot of those things, I think they start becoming mainstream and obvious now, that companies need to look down in their supply chain. They need to have higher control of how they treat people in their supply chains. They need to understand the climate footprint that they have. They're responsible for steering that across all their stakeholders. I mean, a lot of those concepts and thoughts were not as widely accepted back then. It was not part of all the management teams that I advised to have that on the radar. It was not something that we as BCG did a lot of work advising our clients on back then. And in just 6 years that have passed, there's been a huge shift. Nowadays I think sustainability is part of most companies' core in terms of strategies. It's something they need to relate to. It's a topic that the boards, that the management teams spend a lot of time on, understanding the footprint and having that discussion constructively with all your stakeholders, whether that's your customers or it's your suppliers or other partners, is something that is crucial to business strategy, to be relevant, to and to manage risk. So that was a very interesting learning and something I'm happy I got to experience at that point in time.
Yeah, I bet. Sounds incredibly cool, if I'm being honest. But I was going to ask you what came first, the chicken or the egg? Have you always had this passion for sustainability, or was it born with this project?
I wouldn't have said that I had a passion for it before. I would say it's a conversation that I've followed, and sort of was something I think that was partly instilled from sort of values perspective, but it was really then that I think it started to define much more of how I thought about business, how I thought about sustainability as a theme, and how it was going to impact our world and therefore my career and the things I was going to undertake in the coming years. So no, it was definitely a bit of a moment of enlightening, I could say.
Definitely. So the logistics business is subject to sustainability questions, obviously. Absolutely. Was this one of the reasons why you decided to join Airmee?
Yeah, it was definitely one of the things that I found very exciting about building a new company in this, or scaling a company in this industry, was that it's one of the industries where it's very tangible how you can make a transition towards decarbonizing the industry. It was one of the reasons I think Airmee got on my radar was because I had taken notice of the transformation that was happening. You started seeing these electric vehicles and electric bikes around town, and I think that combined with what I had seen in other markets as well around how important good home deliveries and how important fast deliveries and quality of that was to drive e-commerce. That together with the fact that if you were going to build a new business in this sector, you could do it sustainably from the beginning. You didn't have a lot of legacy to transition. That was something that was very appealing to me, and one of the reasons that I really believe that Airmee is sort of solving a very relevant problem and something that I wanted to be part of.
And seeing as you're the CFO with your passion for sustainability, I suppose that Airmee has a sustainability program right now.
Absolutely, we do lots of work, and it's been a core part of the company's DNA from the beginning. We were the first ones to introduce these electric cargo bikes on the Swedish market, and we've since then continued to lead this transition into decarbonizing our operations. So we signed the climate pledge, which means that we commit to reaching the goals in the Paris Agreement 10 years before the Paris Agreement. And then we've gone even further than that and said our ambition is to be climate positive by 2025. And I think those are longer term ambitions. And then we've done a lot of activity in the last few years and making sure our fleet is becoming, or our suppliers' fleets are becoming electric. We're working with projects around how to solve the infrastructure required, how to create the necessary contracts and setup so that we can operate a fossil and emission-free last mile operation. And then eventually we as an industry and we certainly as a company need to tackle also what you call the middle mile, so the longer distances that you drive when you transit goods between cities. And there's a lot of innovation happening with larger electric trucks that are coming on the market in the coming year. And so I think it's going to be very, very interesting to be part of that development. And we certainly aim to continue to invest, to be leading the transition to a sustainable e-commerce delivery ecosystem.
Very good. How do you measure those inputs? I mean, how do you measure the success of this program?
So we do pretty rigorous climate reporting. We do it for every customer, so all of our retailer customers can get emission or sustainability footprint reports on exactly what type of impact and where that comes from, down to the scope 3 emissions, and then we show kind of quarter on quarter and year on year how the investments we're making are helping reduce those emissions towards the goals that we've set. And then we do company level reporting, of course, as well, and we actually climate compensate for the impact that Airmee does have, so that we're a fully climate compensated company. But obviously, climate compensating isn't sort of the end solution. So we hope that we can take out that impact and don't have to compensate for any footprint.
What's the value you've seen out of it so far for you as a company, internally and externally?
I mean, I hope that consumers recognize this as something that's part of our brand, that's part of why you should choose Airmee. So hopefully the growth is part. I hope the growth that we have is partly thanks to the service and the quality of the service, but also a recognition from consumers that this is something they care about and this is something that matters. And we certainly see it from many large retailers where this is an important discussion point in their companies and therefore with their suppliers, such as ourselves. So they clearly value the ambition, the targets, the progress we've made, and getting the reporting so that they get transparency down, in the whole towards their end consumers on the impact that their entire operations have. So I think both end consumers and our customers value it a lot. And I think that was one of the things that also happened a few years back, was that investors started caring a lot more. I think one way to think about it is that investors, to some extent, they quantify risk in their profession. And if you don't know your climate impact, if you don't have a clear strategy, if you don't manage it actively, then you have unmanaged or unquantified risk. And for those that know investing space, more risk that carries a price and a premium, right? So I think that was something I heard many large institutional investors starting to talk about a few years back, and I think is one of the forces that have helped accelerate the focus on sustainability everywhere. And that ranges from the largest listed companies and the influence and the impact that large institutional investors have there, and all the way down to startups and investing in this space, where I know many of the investors we have, the investors that are active in these type of companies and in this space, it's super important for them that there's a focus on sustainability, and that it's something that's measured and managed as a top business strategy and this top business priority. Yeah.
Very good. Let's broaden the scope a bit. Today's title of this talk is Why a Global Perspective Matters.
Yeah.
So if you look at something like tackling the climate crisis, as we've been talking about a bit already, why is it important to have a global scope there?
Is one of these
important
problems
to have a global scope?
Absolutely, it is important. I mean, I think we can take an analog from what we've all experienced in the past couple of years here with the pandemic, right? In one way, we feel so clearly, even though we've been less interconnected maybe physically than ever in a long time in human history, it's something that has impacted us all. It's something that we all share across the planet. That has become very visible, that this is now a global problem that needs global cooperation, global solutions, and be managed as such. And the climate question is very similar in scope. It's not as visible maybe as a pandemic, which is why I would say we've had a longer build up, obviously, of sense of urgency, because we can't see it. It doesn't impact us as directly. The feedback loop works a bit differently. But in nature, it's a problem that's going to impact everyone. It's something that we collectively are responsible for. And I think the only way to get to a good solution is to have very broad and very international collaboration and agreements. And I think, there's obviously lots of dynamics that go into this when you look at macroeconomics and politics and all of that. But I think having, for individuals to have a global perspective matters. Having been in other cultures, having been in other countries, having seen part of the world where the impacts may be more direct. I mean, some of the most vulnerable economies in the world are probably the ones that are going to be the most impacted by climate crisis. So I think having a global perspective, having worked with others, is part of understanding it, and it's also part of then appreciating where others come from when we get to points where we need to have global solutions.
Do you think you'd have this point of view without your international adventures in your past?
I mean, it's certainly helped me appreciate it firsthand to live in other countries, be in different cultures, having traveled a lot and lived abroad a lot. It's definitely made it very relatable for me how that there are different points of views, that there are different cultures, that makes it difficult. But I think it's to get through that, it starts with an appreciation that the differences are there and need to be recognized. So absolutely.
You talked a bit about the pandemic here while discussing the climate crisis. Have you seen anything during this past 2 years that you think would be applicable to other global crises that we're suffering from?
It's a good question. If I've seen anything during the pandemic that, I mean, I think to some extent, there's of course movements in different fronts, in different directions here, but I would hope that it has led to the sense of that we're all interconnected and that we have this as a common challenge that we need to solve. So I mean, it's hard to point to any specific example. Maybe
we can get back to that question if you'd like. It was just me being a bit interested in what you had to say there. So what would you like to see from Sweden, for example, in this sense? How can the Swedish industry act to be seen as good examples while still fueling growth and innovation?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I realized is that, or that I tend to believe at least, is that it's a huge challenge for humanity and for some businesses. It's also a massive opportunity, from a business point of view. There's tons of innovations and tons of solutions, whether they're technical or from with other innovative solutions that can actually help us address these challenges. So I think Sweden, being an innovative country that has produced probably a disproportionate share of international companies that are leading or are built on leading innovations in their field, I think we need to tackle this as an area that we can solve through innovation and by finding and scaling solutions that work. So I think for larger companies, it's investing in R&D in these areas. It's making sure that you're leading by example in your industry, and I think that's something that Swedish companies have done historically and are well set up to do. And then when it comes to smaller companies, it's the same there. I think Sweden can be a hub for innovation and a place where ideas and new technologies, new concepts emerge that can travel internationally. So for business, for regulators, for all parties basically of society, I think there is a huge opportunity there, and I think one needs to invest and to help innovation and cultivate basically Sweden, maybe the Nordics, as an innovation hub for these topics. And obviously,
can growth and sustainability coexist?
Yeah, I think that right now they can be quite complementary, or so to say. I mean, for a company such as Airmee, we believe that sustainability is the key to how we will grow. I think there's lots of different companies right now that are solving a sustainability related problem, and that's the whole story around their growth. So absolutely, I think for businesses, growth or sustainability is not a trade-off, but should be seen as an opportunity.
Very good. What do you do when you're not working, Mikael?
I still entertain my hobbies from younger years, although maybe not as competitively anymore. I still play a bit of chess. I still play football, but at a very different level these days. My girlfriend and I share passion for traveling. Obviously, we haven't been able to nurture that passion for during the pandemic. So we're both longing to get out and travel more again. We're both scuba divers, so we hope to be able to get back to doing some scuba diving in warmer waters than up here.
Did you pick that up in San Diego or?
No, actually, it was something I picked up earlier. That both my parents dived, so my brother and I started diving when we were quite young, and my brother actually went on to take a professional instructor degree. So he has been certifying scuba divers. So we have it a bit in the family.
Okay, you can't dive in New York though.
No, you probably can, but I'm not sure if it would be that exciting. No, it's a bit like here in Sweden. You don't see that much when you come down, and visibility is half a meter or a meter. So yeah, it's absolutely possible to dive, but but yeah, maybe not as
maybe more fun somewhere else.
Yeah, it helps. It helps when it's both warmer and better visibility.
Cool. And success, which I must say that I think you've had, it often comes at a price of setbacks and failures. Do you want to share some of your most memorable setbacks and what you learned from them?
Yeah. Look, so I had. I mean, I remember when first moving over to New York. I remember thinking, as a Swede who speaks English relatively well, there wasn't going to be a lot of, say, adjustment having to do. But I remember my first project there was pretty rough. Kind of working with a financial institution client in Manhattan. Quite a big cultural shift from Sweden. So I remember struggling a bit in the beginning there and having to kind of adjust and cope. So I don't know if that was a setback, but that was you go through periods of more challenge. You go through periods where things are a bit tougher, and then I think what I've always had throughout my career has been at least periods where I've been able to recharge, periods where I've been able to either take vacations or take breaks, or get to move somewhere else and get a bit of a change, which has helped energize me and then get ready to take on new challenges.
And speaking of new challenges, I mean, going from consulting to a line manager role, this is obviously something that many consultants have in mind. What tips can you give them when making that transition?
Look, I think it's important to find a place that you find exciting and motivating. If there's something that people are probably used to from coming from consulting, it's being in a very people-centered business, one where the human capital is the core asset. So I would say look for a company that has elements of that culture, or that recognizes the importance of talent. I think that's an important part. Then it's probably more often than not down to making sure that you see someone that could become a mentor or a boss that you could learn a lot from. In consulting, you obviously switch around in teams a lot, so you end up having a lot of great potential mentors and people who are by kind of design very interested in your development and in your success. And I think finding that in your team or in someone more senior in a line organization also helps to make that transition and make sure that you recognize that component of being valued and continuing to develop. So I'd say the manager, the culture, those are absolutely important points. And then I think for me it was also getting into a very dynamic industry that was fast paced, where I knew things were going to change at a very high rate, because I think as a consultant, you're used to working in a very high paced environment. You're used to jumping from project to project, working on a lot of different topics, and chances are you enjoy that type of dynamic environment a lot. So I think a fast-growing startup has a lot of those characteristics as well.
For sure. And looking into your future instead, what are your long-term aspirations, both professionally and personally?
Yeah, I would say right now I'm very focused on hoping on that Airmee is going to become, or building Airmee into a larger company. We have started our journey of going from Sweden into Denmark and Norway, but have other aspirations and plans as well. So my hope and ambition is building Airmee into a large international company that has transformed the expectation for how consumers shop online and what type of experience to expect when you get things delivered. So that's absolutely my focus. And just personally, I'm looking forward to build a team here at Airmee and to help, to take what I've learned from over a decade in consulting and help grow and make sure that team can, fulfill their potential here at Airmee, that they get excited by going to work, that they get challenged and get to work on fun and exciting things that make a difference.
Great.
Yeah.
And what tips do you have for people who would like to be in the Nova 111 list next year?
I would say apply or ask someone to nominate you. No, but it was a great program. It was very well organized. There was it was a bit of a time investment to go through the application process, but it was a very interesting and I would say very rigorous approach that you had taken to creating the list and to qualifying the applicants, and then it's been a very exciting community to be part of, both within the verticals but across verticals. I was at an event earlier this week and bumped into two other people who we said, hey, we recognize each other, and then we figured out it was from Nova 111.
Cool.
So no, it's a great network that you've created, and so I would say go ahead and apply.
Very good tips, and very happy to hear that you feel like you got something from it as well.
Yeah.
But doing all this, winning Nova 111, your fantastic career that we've been talking about, what drives you?
I think it's back to this competitive nature. I'm quite competitive as a person, so that's always been a underlying sort of driving force for me. But I would say also doing something where you can have a very tangible impact. That's something that I find very rewarding, and then working closely with other people, growing as a leader and helping others grow in their career. I would say those are the main things that drive me.
Cool. And we've talked a lot about sustainability in different aspects. How can Nova help in driving this change that we talked about today?
I think you have highlighted a lot of people who do very interesting things on sustainability in the list. So I think both within the different industries and as a separate kind of focus area. So I would say for me it was very inspiring to see so many people who are working on this topic from different angles, and I think that was important to highlight and to lift up people who are doing really cool things, whether that was in sustainability in the telecoms industry, in the telecom vertical, or people who are focused on more sustainable buildings, which I know is one of the main drivers of energy need, having more sustainable buildings in cities. So there were a lot of interesting things that you pinpointed across industries that I think are important to lift up and make visible.
Cool. We'll keep doing that then.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have 5 minutes to spare now. It's been a very interesting discussion so far. Let's go to the Q&A. We have 2 questions from Malin Drake. The first one: when you were at the start of your career, what different types of possibilities do you see arise when starting either at a management consulting company versus a product company?
What different type of possibilities? Yeah, so I think management consulting, I think you get the opportunity to see a lot of different companies. I mean, over my years, I probably worked with over 50 different clients. And really early on, within a couple of years, I probably worked with 5-10 different companies, seen a lot of different industries, very different dynamics. So I think you get a breadth of experiences. The company is very focused. Management consulting companies, at least BCG, was very focused on building up, your individual toolkit and your skill set early on, whether that was analytical or presenting or doing interviews or all different kinds of skills that you needed to become a productive consultant. I think in a product company, you will probably get a lot deeper and operational. You will have to take those more longer term responsibilities and learn and go, I'd say, even deeper into that industry. So yeah, I think that can offer a lot of learning as well, and a different type of responsibility probably that you need to assume early on if you're at the product company. Yeah, those would be the main differences.
And we have another question from Malin. Can you identify key attributes, knowledge that you have developed that has helped you in your management career?
Yeah. I would say that there's a problem-solving skill set that you build up in a lot of different ways when you're in consulting. So I think the skill of breaking down a problem and structuring how to solve it. That is a very clear one that you develop early on. I think another one is probably around managing senior stakeholders. So early on at BCG, you get exposed to presenting for management teams, CEOs, and you just start understanding the dynamic of those discussions and the decision-making processes that take place at that level. So I think that's another attribute that I found very rewarding. And then they're very specific skills and knowledge, of course, that you develop along the way, whether that's creating really strong PowerPoint presentations and storylines, or modeling, doing an Excel model. But I think actually, and that's heavier in the first few years, and then as you start coming up towards a project leader role or a principal role, it becomes more about the personal impact you can have. It becomes more about the advisory role that you're able to take, and how you lead and inspire your teams and how you help develop others. So that was something that I would say in the latter half of my BCG career that I thought was the most fun and energizing was just how to lead the teams and to help develop them. Both my teams within BCG as well as client teams that we were working with.
Great. That's the last question we had. Malin, I hope you're happy with the answers. I'm very happy with this talk. It was a pleasure to speak with you, Mikael.
Likewise.
Perfect. And I hope all of you listening thought the same. Time's up. So thank you very much for listening. And don't forget to apply to Nova 111.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.